33 minutes past the hour. Welcome back, America. Dwayne Patterson in for Hugh all this week. I am fortunate to be joined by Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, one of our very good friends of the program, going all the way back to him as a candidate for Congress. That's how far back his appearances run. Senator Cotton, good to have you on with Dwayne this time.
Hey, Dwayne, it's good to be on with you. And it has been a very long time since I've been coming on the show. And, for that whole time, I've always heard you talk about what the show would be like if he only had a producer. And now the truth can be told about how great the show would be if only Dwayne had on-air talent to match his abilities. Right?
If only Dwayne had a host. That's the real statement. That's exactly right.
Reminds me a little bit of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in Airplane. When the kid's dad criticized him for not working hard enough, and Kareem said, "Why don't you try dragging Walton and Lanier up the court for 48 minutes?" dragging Hugh Hewitt for 25 years. It's remarkable what you can do with spread your own wings.
That's exactly right. Some very serious stuff to talk about in our time together. I want to begin with, as Washington seems to go, there is a difference of opinion on all sorts of different subjects. But I want to play two different views on what the U.S. policy should be towards tech in regards to the CCP. And here is the left's viewpoint espoused by Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo on CNBC yesterday, cut 16.
The goal is not to be self-sufficient. That is absolutely not the goal. We won't achieve that. We will forever be buying chips from Taiwan, from Korea, from Europe.
Okay, stop right there. We don't even have that as a goal. We don't even want to try to become self-sufficient when it comes to chips and tech. Our mutual friend Robert C. O'Brien, the ambassador extraordinaire, the former national security advisor for Donald Trump, has a very important piece he authored in The Hill this morning. A strong tech sector will keep Xi Jinping from fulfilling his Chinese dream. That seems to be a little different viewpoint than what we heard from Secretary Raimondo. Where does Senator Cotton come down on this?
Well, a lot closer to Robert O'Brien. The key thing is that we be independent of Chinese influence and leverage. In many cases right now, Dwayne, China has America over a barrel. And it's not just in high-tech goods. It's also in relatively low-tech, very traditional things like acetaminophen and ibuprofen and penicillin and other life-saving drugs, or as we learned at the beginning of the pandemic, various kinds of medical equipment and protective devices. On anything that is a threat to American health or safety, we cannot be dependent on China. We'd like to be totally resilient and self-sufficient, but at a minimum, we can't be dependent on China.
Wall Street Journal, staying on the CCP, Wall Street Journal reporting last night that the CCP Secretary General Xi Jinping issued an unusually blunt rebuke of U.S. policy on Monday, blaming what he termed a Washington-led campaign to suppress China for recent challenges facing his country. Quote, Western countries led by the U.S. have implemented all-around containment, encirclement, and suppression against us, bringing unprecedentedly severe challenges to our country's development, end quote. Mr. Xi was quoted by state media saying on Monday. His comments marked an unusual departure for a leader who has generally refrained from directly criticizing the U.S. in public remarks, even as his decade-long leadership has demonstrated a pessimistic view of the bilateral relationship. Senator Cotton, I wouldn't imagine you would have something to say about that.
If only we had effectively contained Chinese communists, Wayne. But I think what Xi is expressing there is frustration at the failures of his own policies. For many decades, going back to the 1980s under Deng Xiaoping, Chinese communists tried to import market-based reforms so they could have the economic growth that comes from capitalism, but still have it under the thumb of Chinese communism while funding their aggressive military buildup. Over the last 10 years, though, Xi has brought a lot of those businesses to heel, as evidenced by his treatment of Jack Ma, the formerly famous Chinese billionaire. And now you're starting to see China growth stagnate because of the corruption, state-owned enterprises, state-influenced and directed enterprises, the way they allocate credit through loans to politically favored enterprises or regions in China, or just look at his COVID zero policy, which he pursued until last November. I mean, it made Gavin Newsom and Andrew Cuomo look like Ron DeSantis or Brian Kemp in its insane adherence to a COVID lockdown policy that had long since proven counterproductive. So I think Xi is, in large part, expressing frustration at the failures of his own policies, poking them in anti-American rhetoric.
That's probably pretty close to where I'm coming down on this too. Also in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, a huge piece by Michael Gordon. The U.S. is not yet ready for the era of great power conflict. Since 2018, the military has shifted to focus on China and Russia after decades fighting insurgencies, but it still faces challenges to produce weapons and come up with new ways of waging war. Tom Cotton, what are we going to do about it, and when are we going to finally get serious about building up the military and the industrial complex?
Dwayne, I'm really worried that we aren't prepared to fight a major conflict. In all likelihood, that conflict would be against China after it tries to invade Taiwan.
Of course.
I've heard a lot over the last year from Pentagon officials who are celebrating the fact that we've moved from, say, a 3 or 4 year timeline for producing munitions to, say, 18 months. That's just not acceptable. It's good. It's moving in the right direction, but we need to get that timeline down to 2 or 3 months. And there's a lot of work to be done by the Pentagon in the defense industrial base, not just with prime contractors like Raytheon or Lockheed, but with the subcontractors, people that are providing the chips and the gaskets and the valves and the ball bearings and the electronics and the energetics. We have to rebuild that defense industrial base. And there's obviously a large demand for it, not just to restock American weapons, but also to sell to our friends in places like Ukraine and Taiwan and NATO countries and Israel, Saudi Arabia, Australia, and so forth. It has to be an urgent priority. It's certainly one of my top priorities in this year's defense legislation that we work on every single year.
Dwayne Patterson filling in for Hugh, speaking with Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton. Up north, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has ordered a probe of alleged Chinese interference in the most recent Canadian election. Now, Senator, I'm aghast that the CCP would interfere in another country's election so close to our own when, if you ask the left, they haven't had any noticeable interference in our own elections. I'm curious as to why they would pick on Canada and not target us.
Well, Dwayne, obviously, communists of all stripes, whether they were Russian or now Chinese, make it a habit to meddle in the internal politics of free societies. Remember in the early 1980s, the major nuclear freeze movement and the effort to keep Ronald Reagan and Western European leaders from deploying cruise missiles to Europe. That was funded in no small part by the KGB. If you've seen advertisements or been subjected to a campaign against hydraulic fracturing, the great technologies unlock so much oil and gas that's funded in no small part by Vladimir Putin's intelligence services. So no one should be surprised that communists, whether they're in China or Russia or Cuba or elsewhere, are trying to meddle in the politics of democratic societies. What is surprising is that the liberal ideologues here in Washington, D.C. have actually invited foreign election meddling by extending the vote to any non-citizen in the United States. That's often characterized, or in the District of Columbia. That's often characterized as letting illegal aliens vote, which is good, but it's also going to let diplomats working on the Chinese embassy, which is, say, mostly spies, vote in D.C. City Council elections. If you thought their laws were bad now, just wait until a bunch of spies from Russia and China and Cuba can vote in their elections.
That's exactly right. I know it's, by the way, just quick side question. I know it's the editor into the building, and it's not typically your concern as far as how the House runs their business, but I'm sure you've observed the Select Committee on China as it's been stood up by our friend Mike Gallagher. What do you make of the committee thus far?
Well, I commend Mike Gallagher for the work in that committee. He's got a great group of members, to include a lot of Democrats who take this threat seriously. Not all of them have stuck their head in the sand about the threat from Chinese communists. I know that Mike Gallagher is committed to trying to have a serious and hopefully bipartisan run on the committee to highlight the dangers that Chinese communists pose to our country, whether it's taking jobs in factories or threatening the privacy and security of your kids through Trojan horses like TikTok or gobbling up farmland, especially farmland right next to military bases. So I'm glad that Speaker McCarthy created this committee and appointed an outstanding chairman, Mike Gallagher, to elevate and highlight the threats that Chinese communists pose to America.
Last story I want to bring to your attention this week is from Lawrence Norman over at the Wall Street Journal. The U.S. and its European allies have split over the response to Iran's production of near-weapons-grade uranium, with Britain, France, and Germany favoring a public censure of Tehran, while the Biden administration is reluctant to even do that, according to diplomats involved in the discussions. Senator Cotton, the French are more robust against the Iranians than we are.
Isn't it remarkable, Dwayne? I mean, when you've got the French to your right on national security, you might want to reassess your strategy.
You see, I'm thinking, yeah.
This is not a surprise, though, Dwayne. Remember, in 2013, as Barack Obama and John Kerry were finalizing the preliminary nuclear deal with Iran, it was, again, the French who were trying to pump the brakes, trying to demand more safeguards, trying to put in more guardrails around this deal. And they did it again in 2015 when Barack Obama and John Kerry finalized the nuclear deal. This is a consistent pattern of Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and the Democrats always looking the other way with Iran. All that does is embolden Iran to go for broke. They've almost enriched enough uranium to create a nuclear weapon. That happened mostly on Joe Biden's watch, not on Donald Trump's watch, because they know they can get away with it. Whereas Donald Trump and Republicans will kill their terrorist mastermind, Qasem Soleimani, and stand up to all of their wrongdoing against us and our friends. Joe Biden and Democrats always turn the other cheek.
But Tom Cotton, 20 seconds, doesn't, I mean, the White House has given up on the Iran deal. There's no way it's going to happen. Why are they still doing this?
Well, they haven't given up on it because they give up on it after articulated another policy. So they'll continue to pretend that maybe they can get back into it, which is a policy of Iran getting a nuclear weapon.
Senator Tom Cotton, thank you very much, as always.